Daniel Klein is Professor of Economics and the JIN Chair at the Mercatus Center. He is Associate Fellow at the Ratio Institute in Stockholm, the Research Fellow at the Independent Institute, and Chief Editor of Econ Journal Watch, as well as a regular contributor to Brownstone Institute. And he's written very often about misinformation in such articles as this. So, Daniel Klein, thank you very much indeed for joining us to talk about this particular topic today.
Great to be with you.
Can I just start us off by saying, can you really explain to us what is misinformation and why are you so concerned about it?
It's a great question. Let me quote a sentence I recently read from James Howard Kunstler. The term misinformation was just the gas in the gaslight used to confound the country about what has really been at stake, which is your personal liberty in what is supposed to be a free country. And I really love that sentence. It was just the gas in the gaslight. I think it is of that nature. I think it's a disingenuous term in the way that it's being marshaled today. It's not the only major terminological move of that sort. Another one has to do with hate, which I've also written about. And if I could, I'd like to kind of before we drill into misinformation and censorship, I'd like to zoom out and talk a little more broadly about what to be making of what's going on.
Go for it.
And how those things are but parts of a larger array of activities and apparatuses, I guess you could say. Yeah. And to do this, I'd like to share this picture I drew. And I know it's not very top quality professional, but you know, this is kind of old school, I guess. So the misinformation stratagem, I see as part of the censorship play. And censorship is but one activity that's very much connected to these others. Censorship kind of presupposes propaganda because that's what the censorship is protecting. If you don't have censorship, the big lies of propaganda will get ripped to shreds. So censorship is needed to keep the propaganda going, these false narratives, these big lies. Another thing down here in what is kind of like a more fast-moving set of activities, that's what these are here, that's why I say short-term as opposed to long-term efforts, is persecution. And the distinction here, a way to think about the distinction here between censorship and persecution. I mean, censorship can be seen as a type of persecution, but I mean persecution other than censorship. Censorship, you know, is kind of about attacking platforms and pressuring platforms to suppress certain kinds of speech. But the people who are suppressed or censored can then go find other soapboxes. You know, they go to Rumble, they go to X, they go elsewhere. And when you've got a powerful personality, a powerful voice, maybe a charismatic personality, that person becomes a threat to the propaganda, and hence this whole apparatus that's above in the picture. Kind of because they're going to find a space wherever they go, and they're going to follow, an audience is going to follow them to where, so they need to basically persecute and try to destroy that person, which we've seen a great deal of this play in the United States here. I mean, Donald Trump is a major example of it in many, many ways, with weaponization of the government agencies, and with major lawfare and even assassination attempts, I would suspect. And we see this in the same play throughout the world with other politicians like Bolsonaro and now Le Pen trying to be put in prison, and other people who challenge the propaganda being persecuted. So, I mean, none of this is really foreign to us when we've all studied oppressive regimes in the past, Maoism, Stalinism, Hitlerism, and so on. You know, Hayek wrote about these as all parts of a piece, even in The Road to Serfdom. Um, so the censorship is part of this array, multi-pronged efforts to sustain, I don't know, their power, their rackets, and so on. Now, what else do we have in this picture? Um, it's kind of flowing from the top, and these formulations, I don't want to try to infuse them into people's minds because I'm very tentative about them myself, and I think the people that I'm borrowing from, like Michael Benz, who I consider an important leader, thought leader in this area, and others like Taibbi and Schellenberger and so on. I think they're all kind of grappling or groping for how to diagram this and how to label the component parts. Um, but there's some kind of nexus alliance of actors. This is a very U.S. focused picture where I talk about agencies like the Department of Justice. But I do think, but I do think that it's not different where you are in the UK and in Europe. Um, so here in the US, Benz, and when I'm talking Benz's language, you can see these quotation marks. That's Benz. I'm quoting Benz, as it were. He calls the State Department, the intelligence community, and the Defense Department the blob.
Right.
And that is just like a core center. And that has become highly allied with certain politicians, I would say, particularly of the Democratic Party of late in the US. So it's not exactly bipartisan. Not that Republicans are not also, I think, implicated in a lot of this, some Republicans, but I think more broadly the Dems are. And then other agencies, everything as Benz puts it, everything runs through the Department of Justice in terms of following up, executing, challenging these things that are happening. So DOJ is a pivotal piece, but then there's the whole broad administrative state, kind of, many things. All of these are enormous elements with many, substructures. Um, and then if you like this, for lack of a better term, all this is the swamp. I don't use the term deep state here. I just don't know where to identify, how do you disambiguate the various terms. But
I've come across the term swamp previously, particularly with Donald Trump's campaign about draining the swamp. Is this the same concept that you're having here? Is this the swamp that would be drained if when Trump comes to power?
yes, yes, broadly speaking, but I don't want to pretend that I don't want to say this is some kind of definitive labeling or diagramming of parts. It's just beyond my ken and hard. So much of it is done in secret in a cloaked, dishonest way that it's very hard to. It's not like they declare themselves these things, these labels that are being used. So, but yes, deep state, swamp, blob, all of these terms are in flux, I would say. So this is just one kind of possible rendering. And then and they have tons of government money, of course, behind it, that then flows through what Benz calls cutout agencies, the swarm army of NGOs and academic funding, deals with private corporations, with media, both legacy and social media platforms. So civil society institutions. So he's broken this down. He's mentioned three here, and they're very, very broad. This civil society institutions includes not only the NGOs, but academia, the academic journals.
Yeah.
So it's enormous. It's just enormous, these categories. private corporations is just other big players implementing DEI or ESG, being pressured, being brought on board, being made contributors to the right politicians, being, clientelism where their authorizations, for example, pharma privileges are all dependent and wrapped up. You have to think about advertising money and so on, and then media. So it's this big. All of this is sort of clientelism with both carrots and sticks. They get carrots, of course, from the taxpayer, and I guess you could say with privileges they can confer through lawmaking, rulemaking, and then sticks is various kinds of punishments if they're not playing ball properly. All
Yeah.
of this, Ben speaks of them explicitly adopting a whole of society approach. How sinister does that sound? A whole of society approach so that they can pressure people in a whole of a society way of maybe not put someone directly in jail, but working it that they lose their job or that they're deplatformed or that they're suppressed or another way canceled. All of this, another key word here I have in yellow is intimidation. And that's running throughout, just like this whole apparatus and all of these activities. You can all think of these as different aspects of intimidation. I don't have that broken out as kind of a separate prong because it kind of suffuses everything. So I guess my bigger point with this picture is simply to say that we need to be thinking about a topic like misinformation as, nested within this much broader problem that we're threatened with today, very seriously threatened with, to really make sense of it. Because like a counselor says, I think the term misinformation is the gas in the gaslight used to confound us.
Mm.
Um,
But
Go ahead.
well, I mean, the picture you've got there seems very monolithic. Is there not any kind of pluralism in your society? Different views competing. This seems to present a single direction, a single approach towards control and misinformation. Is that really the case, or do we have two sides to this where we're pulling one side against another? I mean, after all, you've just had an election and Donald Trump has won, which mitigates
Yes,
against a lot of what you've just described, surely.
absolutely. I mean, first of all, the Donald Trump's victory doesn't necessarily refute a kind of monolithic understanding of this big swamp, because it could just be that it didn't succeed. But I don't want to try to press a monolithic understanding. Again, really, this is just like a kind of groping. And it's me, and I'm presenting it as kind of like a conspiracy, but it's kind of a spontaneous conspiracy where these different fat players, and they can be conflicted with each other for sure, um, kind of discover each other and cooperate, ally with each other for various goals. Sometimes I'm sure there's a lot of tension, competition, conflict between people within this, even if they have the similar kind of vision about wanting to maintain control or to get rich. They probably have competing ideas about how to do that and just simply fighting over their piece of the pie. So I don't mean to press the idea of some kind of tight, monolithic, top down with a big puppet master at the top of this. But something like this seems to me has to be happening.
Yeah.
And again, I would like everyone to realize and to remember our longer history and our longer role in Western civilization of criticizing, highly governmentalized regimes and countries of the past. There's certain tendencies towards these kinds of formations. Another reason, another big point in supportive of the idea that really horrible things are afoot is that sometimes, these actors take bad steps and do things that really look bad or are hard to defend and then start lying about it. And once they start down that path, it's very hard for them to not continue down that path because they're susceptible to being discovered and disgraced, even punished. So they need to double down sometimes. And then it becomes like gathering your forces to protect your side and your skin. That could be how, that's kind of how politics often tends to be. It's like one junta trying to battle another junta, and then trying to preserve its place or its standing if it gains power. Um, so I'm just saying, I'm afraid that, we like to think of ourselves as highly civilized and have successful kind of a Whig theory of history that we've arrived somewhere wonderful and now we're so morally great. But I think we need to think about how we might are very seriously slipping into the kind of vices and sins that we have long criticized other, totalitarian repressive regimes of.
Oh, yeah. Now, tell me, do you see the new appointment of Elon Musk with the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, which has been mooted and will come into play presumably next year? Do you see that as a solution to this, or do you think it's outside of it, where Musk claims he's going to cut through many of these institutions radically and remove what he thinks is about 2 trillion worth of government overhead savings from it? Is that something which will affect this or not?
All I can say is I hope that's the case. And I don't think the hope is totally unfounded. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? Only the shadow knows. That's the old shadow radio program saying.
Oh, right, yeah, yeah.
And I don't know Elon Musk, and I don't know what lurks in his heart. And I can imagine that when people friendly to him uh, are in power, let's say the Trump administration, his Starlink and other Telsa and other big, maybe, that'll be very, very, very lucrative. So it could be that he's a swamp, he's a future, a budding swamp creature, and he's reforming the swamp. And he's an example of what you were just saying about different conflicting parties within kind of a swampy world. On the other hand, I do believe that virtue exists. I believe that goodness is a thing. And I'm hopeful that Musk is, as he purports to be, pretty explicitly a counterforce to exactly what I'm diagramming here.
Right. Well,
And
you
I don't
can't
see any
tell.
reason not to like hope that that's true.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that he's able to do what he can do for the
Yeah,
future.
sure, there's that
But
too.
let's drill down a bit then.
Yes,
Look
yes.
at
So now into this and the misinformation.
so tell us about misinformation and how it's used today, because it's become a rather big subject. Governments right across the world,
Yes,
Australia, Canada, Europe, they're all talking about clamping down on misinformation because the internet is a wild west of
yes.
knowledge and information, and there needs to be some control of it. What's your concern about that bit of it?
Well, my concern is that it's all like Kunstler says, a means, a stratagem of confounding us and imposing censorship, where they essentially are going to be the arbiters, they being this swamp or whatever, and these agencies that are have clearly been doing this very clearly. Now it's been exposed through so many documents, and it's happening the same in Britain and Europe and so on. I mean, it's not a big mystery to see what's really behind it and what the agenda is, but it's to confound us so that they can pass off and get away with censoring us, where they are going to say, this is what is misinformation, censor it. And if you say, well, then you are thrown back into a defensive position. You're highly intimidated because they can do all sorts of horrible things to people. They can persecute you individually when it comes to it. People are trying to defend themselves against raw power and oppression. Misinformation is, I think, an effective censorship stratagem because it is very confounding to accuse what they're censoring as misinformation. And essentially what I've done, I have I'm an economist, but I do intellectual history and I do a lot of economic philosophy. So I have I'm a very Adam Smith, David Hume kind of guy. I'm actually a big Anglophile and Scotophile, by the way.
They're both Scottish, aren't they? No.
I'm sorry.
They're both Scottish, Adam Smith and David Hume.
Yes, yes. And then my other third favorite 18th century Brit is Edmund Burke, who's not English either, really. But I mean, I like a lot of Brits, English as well from the period. But those three are my favorites. Anyway, my point is that what I've done in writing about misinformation as a censorship stratagem and in writing about hate as a censorship stratagem is trying to equip people to not be so confounded, disarmed, thrown back on their heels when this is thrown at them. Because kind of sifting through philosophically, the very word information with respect to other related terms, you might say in epistemology, like interpretation, judgment, knowledge, and facts, and trying to kind of sort it out so they can kind of see why this is such a irresponsible and really obnoxious stratagem. That is to say, to label what they say, what you say as the person being censored, misinformation. So let me say a little bit about the word misinformation or the misinformation stratagem, and then maybe.
Do we need the picture up on the screen still? Because we can then.
No, we really don't. We really don't. So thank you. Sorry about that. Let's say someone tweets out a message, and let's say someone tweets out the two-word message, "God exists." And suppose you think that's false. Is it therefore is it the case that you therefore think it's misinformation? I would say no. I would say no. And we shouldn't let ourselves be led into that way of speaking, where anything that we disagree with, anything that we think in the very broad sense is false, is wrong, is therefore misinformation. The word information traditionally has a kind of narrower sense of knowledge claim to it. It presupposes a kind of working interpretation of data, of facts, of symbols. For example, numbers listed in a telephone directory. So it lists numbers, and that is within this format, information. These numbers are listed in formation, in a formation. That is to say, an interpretation of what this array of data, of markings, of symbols mean. Okay, and the word information has traditionally implied a kind of straightforward, common working format, or if you like, basic interpretation of what those markings, what those pixels, if you're looking at it on a screen, mean. That's what information really should be thought of, and traditionally had been. And what they're doing, and let me just say a little further. When data or markings are faulty, like a wrong phone number is listed, it's not a matter of fervent discussion and controversy. It's like someone points out, oh, you know what? I dialed that number and it's disconnected. Or I just spoke to him the other day and this is his number. It's not like someone's going to give you this big argument about, oh, no, I believe me, you're spreading misinformation. You're a bad guy. You should be suppressed. It's obviously just like, oh, thank you for the correction. And you fix it. It's like fixing a typo. It's like fixing a misquotation. Think of the word misquotation, or just mistake, or mistyping something. It's not a big fervent matter of controversy. So that's what information is, which within a broader understanding of knowledge or knowledge claims or belief. Judgment is very important to these bigger issues. Does God exist? What are you judging over? You're judging over broad interpretations of learning, of understanding of the world, of books you've read, people you've talked to, authorities who have spoken to the issue. Who to trust is a matter of judgment. Who is authoritative is a matter of judgment. These are not matters of simple information. That's really my point. And so when they come at you like, does God exist? I say, no, that is not a matter of information. And so you can say, I agree with it. You can say, I disagree. You can say it's right. You can say it's wrong. But I don't think it's proper to kind of treat it as an informational claim. That's my point. And I'm saying that the things that they are tarring as misinformation are more like God exists than that's the guy's phone number. Yes. So if you think about COVID issues which they censored, aggressively, did it come from a lab? Was there earlier spread than they claimed? Do ivermectin and other therapeutics work effectively? Are the lockdowns effective ways of fighting it? Do masks work? Are the vaxes safe? Are the vaxes effective? All those claims are not simple matters of, did I get the guy's phone number right? They are very broad interpretive understandings of complex phenomena, not set into a clearly defined array or format or formation as information is. And so when they accuse, somebody, I love that guy. Now I'm spacing on his name. The British guy who did all those COVID. Yeah, I don't have his name at hand. Elderly guy from a medicine background. Who?
Mike Yeadon? Not him?
No, I don't think that's the name. I'm spacing on the guy's name. He's a YouTuber, and he was very dancing.
John Campbell?
Yes, John Campbell. Was that his name? Yes. Yeah, wonderful human being. Just to me, a great representative of truthfulness. We have to learn how to recognize truthfulness, and because we do depend so much on trusting people whose authority we feel we put stock in, we put faith in, we judge trustworthy. And these are all aspects of understanding and exploring and debating these very high, important and controversial issues. It's not matters of getting information straight.
Can I just pin this down a little bit further? Because I think this is a very important point. And in your paper that I read, you use a very good illustration of this. You talk about the difference between facts and opinions. You take movies, you say that some movies are black and white, some movies are in color. Now that's about a fact. You could either check it out, or you can find out whether it's true or not. Citizen Kane was in black and white. Roman Holiday was in color, if I remember correctly. But
I don't think that's correct.
But the question of which is the best movie, which is a matter of opinion as to whether Citizen Kane is better than Roman Holiday, is a different category entirely. Now,
exactly.
So my point, though, my question to you is, isn't the people who are making this point about misinformation, aren't they saying that everything really comes down to facts, not opinions? So, for example, whether COVID vaccination works or not, surely that can be tested and found out to be true. Whether climate change is causing heating or not, Surely that's a matter of fact rather than opinion. What do you say to
No,
those things?
I wouldn't treat those as they're very loose and open to judgment and open to debate. It depends on what you mean by something being something working, and so on.
Yeah.
Um, but right. I mean, take the movie and two questions about movies. Is a movie in black and white or color? And that's again not going to be a matter of great controversy. We're not going to debate that
Well, you can
fervently.
check it. You can check it and find out precisely
Yeah.
whether it's true or not, can't you?
Exactly, exactly. Whether Roman Holiday is a better movie than Citizen Kane, that is something we can go on and kind of movie experts or authorities, in a sense, can go on debating till the day they die.
Mm.
Um, because it's a much broader questions again about making sense of the world and what's beautiful and what's effective and what's worthwhile, what's most important. Um, and I think that these the claims that are being censored are generally more like what's a good movie kind. I mean, they're not simple informational claims. They're not. I mean, you know, you say, oh, you can test whether or not a vaccine works or whatever. And it's like, well, you know, not all these tests are agreeing with each other. Not all these tests are trustworthy. We've seen that a lot of the testing and trials have been shady and dubious and challenged. And so then it comes down, and what does it come back to? I mean, we're going to read all those reports and appendices and try to decipher. But what does it come down to? Who are you going to trust? And we disagree so profoundly. They're basically saying, you're right. They're basically saying everything is as if it can be made cut and dry in format. Does the CDC say this or not? And that's supposed to be Mount Olympus. But that's ridiculous. That's, you know, that's perfectly ridiculous. That's the end of truth.
Yeah.
And that's just designating certain agencies as, you know, something we're supposed to, and science is supposed to lay down before and propagandize for. It's, you know, it's a completely anti-liberal mentality, supposition that goes behind this information pitch, as if
That's liberal
things
in the classic sense of the word liberal, not in the American.
correct
Yeah.
in the Adam Smith sense of the word.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, which is what we use. Why is it that for example, the media, which you would expect to be dispassionate, or used to be in the past, mainstream media used to be interested in facts only, but now they put a lot of weight behind this idea of misinformation. We have the Trusted News Initiative, we have BBC Verify, we have dozens of other of these organizations which the media are now getting together to try to determine what is misinformation and what isn't. Why are they so interested?
I don't, you know, it's a great question, and it's part of the big mysteries of what the heck is going on. Part of is that they might, BBC, for example, might be highly interested in suppressing these new forms of competition, especially social media, X, you on YouTube, you know, John Campbell,
Yeah.
everybody, Peter McCullough. And so, and all I can say is that working with the media with carrots and sticks, you know, including access to the swamp. You know, how do they get their news? Oh, they talk to a White House advisor, says that this and this is what's going to happen next in Ukraine, or, you know, whatever. They're very, very dependent, the media, on the swamp or the, you know, the state, if you like. And again, we just see them twisting arms. We saw Mark Zuckerberg complaining a couple months ago about having had his arms twisted. We've seen Elon Musk resist them and become, you know, getting a big bullet, a bullseye put on his back and basically being subject to persecution. So the state is behind it. I mean, the swamp, the blob, whatever, you know, I don't know, again, how to call it. It's a great question, though, Philip. I mean, why are they so complacent? Why are they carrying water? Why are they clicking their heels as they are so often, especially at something like the BBC? I don't know, but it's been something that's happened so much, especially in the last 5 years. It's become so pronounced.
Is it?
I think we've kind of realized, by the way, in the way they've been doing it so aggressively. Again, you got to think about this kind of downward spiral where they have to double down on bad
Yeah.
once they start down, but it becomes so overt or visible that now we're kind of realizing that it's not just 5 years old. It's older. It's
Yeah.
older, but it's been mounting.
But your diagram, which you showed us, is that indicating that really what's behind this ultimately is government and the
Yeah.
way government, although it's talking about making legislation against misinformation, it seems the government has often been at the forefront of creating misinformation. And it didn't
Absolutely.
just happen last year or the year before. I mean, it goes all the way back to, I don't know, the Warren Commission and the
Yeah.
report that was put out there. But you've got the Hunter Biden laptop more recently. You've
Yep.
got COVID-19 and the information about that. There's climate change stuff, which comes out, which isn't always entirely reliable. There's election integrity issues, which you can't question. All of this is controlled by government, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. Government's a very special player with very special powers. It institutionalized things which, if your neighbor tried, would be criminal. And you know, it's got the badge and the gun and everything else. So it's a very special player that can drive things in a very fundamental way, and it does. I would just say, Philip, that I kind of advise you not to throw the word misinformation back at them and to say rather that, you know, we've used traditionally called it propaganda, and they propagandize. They are the, you know, Godzilla of big lies, of propaganda, of programmatic lying, which we call propaganda. And absolutely, that's what they're doing. And again, it's really to protect those that they need to do this, the censorship, because otherwise the critics will expose the falsehood of the big lies.
But this is becoming more dangerous, it seems to me, isn't it? I put it to you that it's more dangerous because in the past it used to be merely, let's say, merely propaganda, lies put out by whichever actors wanted you to believe a whole range of things. But now that the government is becoming much bolder, it seems to be, because right across the world, somehow or other, there's now new legislation is being enacted in order to further clamp down on dissenting voices. And very often misinformation is used as a kind of term to disguise
Yes.
itself as meaning simply dissent, doesn't like dissent. But you're having legislation in Australia, there's legislation in Canada, there's legislation in the UK where I am, there's the UK Online Safety Act, that kind of thing, which is preventing people from saying something which is different from the narrative. Now, is this, as far as you can see, a new thing? And how dangerous is that in terms of legislative powers
It,
being used here?
it's super duper dangerous. If free speech is crushed, the big lies and the bad things that the people in Brussels, the people in London, the people in Washington, D.C., the people in Ottawa can do, it becomes much less constrained and accountable. And it seems like Vice, kind of like a vicious tail, is taking over these structures and government things. You know, I'm very pleased about the election of Donald Trump, which I think is a super significant development in all of this, especially in the United States context. But I agree, it's becoming shocking what they're doing. And we really got to get our minds around what's happening and fight back. That's all I can say is push back, resist, make it hard for them. It doesn't stand up to reason, you know, at all what they're saying and doing. So we just need to expose it and challenge it and tell
But
the truth.
you've got one very important difference in America, which we don't have in the UK, which Australia and other countries don't have either. Now, as you've got the First Amendment, is that not a suitable bulwark or protection against all of this?
It's been important for sure, but they are out to subvert it. They have been subverting it. So, the battle is on.
I did
Um,
hear John Kerry say something about the First Amendment
oh
stands
yeah,
in the way of.
yeah. The whole parade of them were talking about rolling back free speech in the First Amendment. Kamala, Kerry, Hillary. Um, I'm not sure if Biden was quoted saying something to that effect, but perhaps. Uh, it's clear. It's very clear. It's quite open and explicit what their aims are, I would say, or what their agenda is. Let me just make one more point before we leave the term misinformation. It's
Yeah,
just that, when you take this, when you realize that there are these broader layers and dimensions of knowledge or belief, such as interpretation, judgment, and so on.
yeah,
See, they accuse John Campbell, let's say, or Peter McCullough of speaking misinformation. And what is Peter McCullough, perhaps? I mean, I really like him too. But what does perhaps someone like that do in response? He says, no, it's not misinformation. It's true information. But in a way, he's been trapped because even though he believes in the truth of what he's saying, he actually shouldn't call it information. He too is making a broader interpretive claim where judgment has been exercised in this open way, like which is a good movie, and so he shouldn't fall into the trap of saying mine is true information. He should say, I'm making a scientific claim. I'm a belief, a judgment, whatever. And, you're illegitimately suppressing my freedom to discuss this. So accusing somebody of misinformation kind of triggers a reaction of saying, no, it's true information. But I think it's a kind of a trap and a bad position to work from to say mine is true information. Don't even let them trap you into the information box, if you follow me.
yeah. How should you deal with it then? Because I interviewed Peter McCullough quite early on in the COVID era, and he struck me as being, first of all, incredibly knowledgeable about what he was talking about. He's an expert in what he was saying. He's the most published person in his field in the world. And he also struck me as being clear-sighted and entirely honest in his approach, and also well motivated in wanting to save as many lives as possible. That's how he struck me. I interviewed him, had an hour's talk with him. I put it up on YouTube, and it lasted 2 days before it was taken down by YouTube, by their management, as misinformation. What do you do in the face of that then? I mean, you can't. There's no comeback, is there? There's no appeal. Well, there was a notional appeal, but it was a nonsense. It didn't work.
Yeah, but it's worth, just raising a ruckus about it as much as you can, just shouting and screaming about it, exposing it. It's so preposterous. And I know they just come back with these nonsense little brief, misinformation. They don't even specify what exactly they're disagreeing with
No.
and why, what their Mount Olympus authority is all based on. It's all just a big fraud. And it totally belies the whole notion that there's some cut and dry, rigorous basis for making these judgment calls.
Let me ask you this question. Let me switch the whole thing around.
Yeah.
Ask you this. You would agree, I presume, that the internet is a big, wide area where anybody can post anything they like. Some of the stuff is incredibly useful, valuable, and brilliant information. Some of it is nonsense. Some of it is just made up stuff and people's not just wacky opinions, but crazy off the wall opinions. Some of it could even be dangerous. So how do you, starting from scratch, how do you deal, or should you deal with that situation where you have a medium which has good and poor quality information.
Yeah.
What do you do about that? How do you deal with it?
It's called learning and
Uh,
developing judgment and critical thinking
But that's
and
an individual matter, isn't it?
and yes, of course. I mean, look, that's what we are, and that's what each of our responsibility is, and that's how we should be treating each other. The only way to learn better judgment is to have the responsibility of exercising judgment, learning by doing. The only way to, learn how to be a responsible adult is to be given the responsibility of acting like an adult. I know it's not something you throw at a 5-year-old, but, eventually we've got to treat adults as adults, and people have to develop their sense, just like you say, you have so much regard and respect for McCullough and for John Campbell. I mean, we develop these sensibilities about a person's integrity, truthfulness, sincerity, and we have to do that. And that's what our whole culture and civilization depends on. There's no option, really. The idea of centralizing it to some anonymous conditioners bureaucracy, I use the word conditioners from C.S. Lewis in The Abolition of Man, where they want to somehow impose some kind of judgment. It's all like C.S. Lewis, Abolition of Man, this whole swamp thing. Um, it doesn't, it's just as vulnerable to the failures of judgment. It's more vulnerable because there's probably more incentive to pursue bad things and to protect. There's less correction. You got to think about correction mechanisms. What happens to people when they make bad judgments or don't learn how to make better judgments? Do they pay consequences? And the only way, again, to get people correcting things on a path is for them to have responsibility, a kind of accountability, where it's up to them. And, hiving it off into some anonymous, impenetrable, unapproachable government agency that can just crush any challenger, that's a recipe for total disaster, as we've always argued in
Yeah.
Western civilization.
So governments should keep out of the issue of determining so-called information versus misinformation, and it should be down to the individual to learn to make their own correct judgment. Is that how you put it?
Basically, that government should get out of trying to figure out the complex and truths and science. It
Well, they
shouldn't
often
try to
get it
set
wrong
itself
anyway,
up
don't
as
they?
I'm sorry?
They often get it wrong anyway, don't they? They've made so many mistakes,
Yes.
governments. So that's
Yes.
acceptable. Yeah.
Uh,
Uh,
and
okay.
let me just add that it's not the individual left. I mean, again, there needs to be scholarship, communities, a sociology of judgment that develops, and it's got to grow up, and we learn to follow certain thinkers, and so on. I mean, Adam Smith was a great guy, and he was actually cultural royalty in his day. So how was it that such a wise and virtuous man was elevated to like a mountain peak, like in Scotland, if you like, which was such a highly regarded mountain peak, and he was like first among his peers even. And how did that happen sociologically? And it's based on organic communities of scholarship, opinion, discussion, free speech, and so on. And so it's not just an individual out on his own in this kind of hyperspace world. It's got to be based on relationships and institutions, but they have to have integrity, and not be corrupted.
Yes, the difficulty is that there aren't many modern papers out there about misinformation. And I mean, I've looked at some of them, and they don't seem to grapple with the real issue. They're interested in how to um, detect anything which goes against the narrative, the norm, the orthodoxy of today. I remember I had a student not so long ago who wanted to do a project, and he wanted to create some software which detected misinformation. And I asked the question, right, so before you do that, tell me, how will you get a bit of software which detects what is true and what is false? And the question hadn't even crossed his mind because he wasn't concerned about what was true or false. He wanted to know does this pronouncement coincide with what the majority think. And that's not the truth.
Yeah, the official narrative.
The official narrative, yes.
Yeah.
And very often modern academia is only concerned about not the truth itself, unfortunately, not like they would have done in the days of David Hume and Adam Smith. They're more concerned with meeting the needs of their grant givers and their money suppliers.
Yeah, they're careerists too.
Before we conclude, because we're getting roughly to the end here, I did want you to ask you another question on in terms of hate, because these two things seem to go closely together. Misinformation, there's a lot of legislation about that coming forward, but there's also a lot of information about hate speech, hate acts, those kind of things. That's mushroomed massively over the last 10 or 20 years. Could you say something about that and how it connects here?
Yeah, absolutely. Hate is another big stratagem that they're using. Again, it's like a very interesting topic and philosophically challenging and difficult. And they're throwing people off balance by, labeling them haters and accusing describing what they say as hate or hateful. And we need to get more assured and familiar with hate as a sentiment and how, in fact, it is part and a necessary part, hate is, of any healthy and complete system of sentiments, as it is in the Theory of Moral Sentiments of Adam Smith. That's his first great work. Hate. Well, let's start with good things. We like things that we think are good. They're good for us, they're good for our family, they're good for our friends. All of that is our part or parts of the whole. And so Smith authorizes us to think about what's good for our part, because that's where we're most effective in actually doing good. And as long as we don't violate justice, truthfulness, and so on, within certain rules, it's proper for us. If each of the parts takes good care of itself, the whole will be well taken care of. So we like and love the things that are good and that conduce to good. Those things are love-worthy. Things that work systematically against those good things are hate-worthy. We should develop sentiments that push them back, that deal with them with, reluctance or care. So hate is a necessary part, and it is a motivator to protect the things that are love-worthy. Like you need to stand up to, like hate can inspire courage to stand up to things that are hate-worthy. So hate is a necessary part of a system of morals. Edmund Burke said, they will not love where they ought to love, who do not hate where they ought to hate. Okay.
Yeah. And we're
Now,
trying to eliminate all hatred, aren't we?
yes, that's like it's not maybe always necessarily explicitly stated as such, but it seems to be the implication, and it's an incoherent notion, and it's also dishonest. You don't think those people hate people and things? Of course they do, as they must as human beings.
Yeah.
So that's also just like a vanity and a lie, if that's what they say. But they are going to be the ones who are, determine what is hate and what isn't. The thing again is that they call you hateful, they accuse you of hate, and how do you react to that? And a lot of people are not really ready to deny it, but they don't really want to say, yeah, I do hate, and it's hate worthy. So they're challenged, okay? And so people again are confounded, to use Kunstler's word. But we have to learn to think through these things. Let me say that while I emphasize the counterpart relationship between love and hate, or love-worthy and hate-worthy, at the same time, Adam Smith explains at length that the expressing of these two different sentiments, love and hate, are not symmetric. that there is greater care to be taken with the expression of hate for a number of reasons. And so while certain things are hate worthy, in some sense, you should develop a sense of what's hate worthy. You don't therefore express hate as readily or strongly as you express love, because it's a troublesome thing. It's a thing where the passions or sympathies are divided, because obviously if I'm expressing hate of Bob over here, the spectator cannot enter into both my sentiment and his position smoothly and, with a love fest, like all around social enjoyment. When I love Bob, the spectator can enter into both me and to Bob without any conflict. So there's all these reasons why there is a truth to tamping down hate, for sure. And Adam Smith teaches us to tamp down hate, but it's not by any means an eradication of hate.
No, it's been weaponized, particularly in
Yes.
legal issues. I mean, we have, I don't know if you probably don't have something similar in America, and you should be very thankful for it. We have something called non-crime hate incidents over here. And there's a big story has just blown up in this country with a Daily Telegraph reporter had a knock on the door. Her name was Alison Pearson. Had a knock on the door this last Sunday, on Remembrance Sunday, which is your kind of Veterans Day, I think. And the police were there, and they said, "We've come to discuss with you a non-crime hate incident where you tweeted something which people have objected to 1 year ago." 1 year ago, and we've come to ask you to come to an interview with us. And if you don't come voluntarily, then we'll put you on a wanted list and we'll arrest you sometime or other, so that you can talk about why you tweeted this tweet a year ago. And it's blown up in our papers. Even Elon Musk has made a comment to say this kind of thing has to stop. But it's the weaponization of hate. It's not a crime. They say it's not a crime, but nevertheless, you've hated. We think you may have hated someone, and therefore we're going to, punish you in some kind of way. That,
Whole of society approach. It's
yeah,
the whole of it's intimidation. It's Orwellian. It's downright Orwellian. These people are taking 1984 not as a warning, but as a playbook. It's
yeah,
really terrible. And coming back to Orwell's language, I don't know if he used this exact expression, but it's got the flavor of 1984. Wrong think. I
yeah.
mean, that's what it's really about. But they can't come out and admit that. They can't just say, Peter McCullough, we accuse you of wrong think, because it's too obvious that they're
Too
making a
obvious.
big
Yeah.
judgment that, that they don't have a Mount Olympus status to justify. And they're really, whether they're accusing you of hate or of mis or disinformation, it's really just, we accuse you of wrong think. If they were straightforward, if they were honest, that's what they would say.
So one last question, my final question to you then, if I may, and that is, where is all this taking us in the future? Are you hopeful in the future for the next 4 years in your country, or are you pessimistic? What's your outlook?
It's hope springs eternal. We got to deal with the cards we're played. And it's very, very shocking and bad developments. If someone told me 10 years ago that we'd be here, I would have been amazed. I think so. I think it's really, really bad and disappointing and sad. Um, I am encouraged by by Trump's victory. I'm encouraged by like the Javier Milei type developments. Not that there's so many. And I think truth has power. I think truth, honesty, truthfulness has power. So I do think that, we've got means of pushing back against this foolishness and, dare I say it, evil.
Yeah. Daniel Klein, thank you ever so much for your time today and for a fascinating conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.